Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I will be going over the very latest forecast for Tropical Storm Idalia in terms of Florida's impacts. I'm talking surge, I'm talking wind, I'm talking rain. I'll be doing it all starting exactly at 9 o'clock, which is coming up in just 2 minutes. So I'm going to let the audience filter in and then start exactly at 9. So I'll be back in about 90 seconds. All right, folks. Well, it is exactly the 9 o'clock hour here on the East Coast, and I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut bringing you the very latest on Idalia. It's a dangerous situation developing for north central and west central Florida, and I'll be discussing all of the forecast implications for surge, rain, and wind. Uh, this is an infrared satellite imagery of currently looking down from space at the cloud tops. This is Idalia here. The eye may be drawn up here. This is Category 4 Hurricane Franklin with sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. We don't need to worry about Franklin. It's nice to look at. It's not going to hurt anybody. That's the way we like hurricanes. The problem is Idalia down here. That's what's going to be the threat for Florida going forward. So I'm going to start, as I always do, by talking about the key messages that the National Hurricane Center forecasters want to communicate to Florida residents as we're looking at the current forecast. Key threat number one, no surprise, we're talking life-threatening storm surge along portions of the Florida Gulf Coast. We've got storm surge warnings in effect. That includes the Tampa Bay region. Even though they're not going to be seeing a landfall, there's going to be very serious storm surge in the Tampa Bay region, as well as the Big Bend and the Nature Coast north into Appalachia Bay. We're talking 8 to 12 feet of storm surge potentially. And the peak area anyway. Key point number two, we're expecting hurricane conditions somewhere within this hurricane warning area, which includes all of Appalachia Bay, the Nature Coast south to Tampa Bay. There's potential for destructive winds where Idalia's core moves onshore. Now we don't know where within that range exactly is. It's going to come ashore and that core of damaging winds will be, but it's going to be somewhere and it's going to be destructive where it comes in. And then the third key point is that there's potential for flash and urban flooding across portions of Florida and north into Georgia and the Carolinas as well. This is the forecast track from the 5 o'clock advisory with the 7 p.m. intermediate advisory intensity and position information. Idalia has sustained winds of 70 miles per hour. That's just shy of Category 1 hurricane intensity. It's moving north at 8 miles per hour, and the general NHC forecast track takes Idalia north into the Gulf of Mexico, strengthens it to a major hurricane by the end of the day tomorrow. That's what that M means there as it's passing west of Tampa, and then bends the track north-northeast into the Nature Coast or the Big Bend sometime in the morning or the early afternoon on Wednesday. And that really hasn't changed a ton since yesterday. This is the overlay of the last 6 Hurricane Center forecast tracks. These X's are where the storm actually is. And you can see that it's following the NHC forecast tracks quite nicely here. We're not really seeing a ton of surprises in terms of where this thing is moving today. It followed the NHC forecast. Now up here, closer to landfall, this dark blue line, that's the most recent forecast, the 5 o'clock forecast. And you can see that has nudged just a little bit back to the west after coming east all the way to Cedar Key at the landfall point. We've gone about 25 miles west. That is very normal variability. That's the kind of sloshing back and forth that you expect to see with any hurricane forecast. This is the intensity forecast, the last 6 intensity forecasts from the Hurricane Center. This is the current one. Peaks Idalia out as a Category 3 hurricane with 120 mile per hour sustained winds here early in the day on Wednesday, just before landfall. Yesterday, at this time, we were talking about a Category 2 peak in intensity, and as expected, that's come up to Category 3 today. Now, one thing that is a little interesting is that this current intensity of 60 knots, it is a little bit below where some of the NHC forecasts already had this as a hurricane. So it hasn't gotten quite as strong, quite as fast as some of the forecasts. There still is a lot of intensity upside during the day tomorrow, which we'll get to. So let's take a look at Idalia. What's it doing out there right now? This is radar out of western Cuba. Shows where it's raining heavily, and you can see all those heavy bands of showers and storms are all spiraling around a center of circulation right in here that's passing just to the west of the western tip of Cuba right now and continuing to track basically due north. Now, one thing you'll note looking at this radar imagery is that, again, we're still talking about a system where most of the heavy showers and storms, they're all kind of on the east and the south side of the circulation, and that's good. We don't want to see a symmetrical hurricane. Symmetrical hurricanes strengthen more quickly, they're a bit more organized, and they're more efficient at delivering high winds down to the surface. We also have reconnaissance aircraft flying around, actually several of them flying around Idalia right now at this hour, and they show, again, that kind of lopsided structure. These kind of blues that's an area where the winds aren't as strong. They're more on the order of 20 or 30 miles per hour, and all these yellows and reds that the aircraft is finding south and east of the center, those are the stronger winds. The dot right there, that's the center of circulation. Pressure has been dropping in the last few hours. It's down to 983 millibars, down from about 989 earlier in the day. So there is evidence that Idalia is starting to intensify. It hasn't done so quickly today, and we can thank our lucky stars for that. We can also thank a couple of other factors that have kind of kept the rate of intensification in check. This is water vapor imagery, kind of as a tracer for the airflow up at around, say, 5 miles up above the Earth's surface. And we can see up here, this spin right here, that's an upper level low. And what that upper level low has been doing is it's kind of been pushing some winds aloft out in the northwest over Idalia, and it's resulting in there not being a lot of convective activity north of the circulation center, which is right in here. It's imparting a little bit of wind shear. The other thing to look at is this kind of patch over here of kind of grays and yellows. That's an area of drier air, and that wind shear has kind of been pushing a little bit of that drier air over the western half of Idalia, and that's something that I was hoping would happen today. It's something I was looking for, and I'm glad to say that it's kept Idalia in check a little bit. It doesn't really help us a ton going forward, but we are at least starting from a little bit lower of an intensity plateau or threshold than we were previously. Taking a look at infrared satellite imagery, again with the circulation center right in here, again you can really see all the deep convection is not north and west of the center. It's mostly east and south of the center. And you can also see what I've plotted the kind of 18Z GFS ensemble tracks with a lot of different options of where one of the models thinks this thing could be tracking, and it appears to be, again, just kind of following on down that forecast track line or even on the eastern edge of it. So that's good. We're we're not seeing a lot of forecast surprises. We're seeing relatively predictable behavior. So unfortunately, going forward with time, what we'll be doing tomorrow is we're going to get rid of some of the impediments to intensification. Idalia will be moving up into these very warm waters. We know the situation here. Waters in the upper 80s, very deep waters as well, and that's something that'll be providing an enormous amount of raw potential energy to Idalia as it goes all the way to the northeast Florida, to the northeast Gulf, and approaches the Florida Gulf Coast. The waters are almost 90 degrees all the way to the coastline. The other thing, and I talked about this yesterday, these are upper level winds. Tomorrow, early afternoon, this is where the hurricane will be located at that time. And what we can see here is that these upper level winds, after the air has come up into the storm, up in those thunderstorms, it needs some place to go. It's got to go out and away from the storm. And Idalia will be connecting with this jet streak up here, and that all that air that's coming up through the storm is going to be evacuated out into that jet streak that it'll be connecting with tomorrow. And at the same time, air can also evacuate out to the south of the storm. You see this air, that airflow moving away from the storm, so that's something that's favorable for intensification. Again, this is something I've been talking about for several days, but we're approaching the time when it's going to be coming into play, and it's very much something that I'm expecting to happen. I'm expecting a rapid intensification event tomorrow. Rapid intensification means you're strengthening by 35 miles per hour within 24 hours. The maximum sustained winds are up by 35 miles per hour. So right now we're at 70 miles per hour. If we get a rapid intensification event, that could bump very, very well bump us up to Category 3, just like the NHC forecast of intensity shows. These are some of the models for intensity, and again, so we're actually right about here for the time, and the storm is right here at 60 knots of intensity, so it's kind of within that threshold. Just a little bit longer where the intensity will probably not be increasing that dramatically, and then tomorrow morning, that's when a lot of these hurricane specific models show that pretty rapid increase in intensity up to Category 3, or even some of them supporting potentially Category 4 intensity. I certainly wouldn't rule it out at this time. The lack of intensification, or the slower intensification today, maybe reduces the odds of a Cat 4 a touch, but it's still on the table. I wouldn't rule it out with the outflow and the waters as warm as they are. Taking a very quick look at track, again, there's not a ton of uncertainty in the track scenario. One thing that got some attention online today was this you'll see this leftward cluster. That's the GFS, the HMON, and the HWRF, all kind of on top of each other, shifting west more into Appalachia Bay with the track than they were earlier. You have this rightward cluster more in the direction of Taylor County or Dixie County over towards Cedar Key, Steinhatchee. This shift that we saw, some of these models have already started to shift back in a westward direction with the next model run. Again, models shifting back and forth a little bit, the Hurricane Center track shifting back and forth a little bit. That's very normal. I continue to expect that landfall will occur somewhere between Alligator Point and probably Cedar Key, right in that highlighted section of coast there. Now, a lot of you live in that region. The problem is that those slight shifts in track can make a big, big difference in terms of impacts. And I understand that, and I realize it's very stressful. I live in Tallahassee. It's very stressful for me too, but I truly can only say at this point that we don't really know exactly where that core of the most intense winds is going to go. Just as an illustration here of kind of the general agreement that we're continuing to see with the models, these are 4 ensemble clusters from the American, the European, the British, and the Canadian models, and going forward with time, here comes the storm tracking west of Tampa and then turning northeast towards the upper Nature Coast or eastern GFS in green here on the left side of the track, and the Euro a little bit further east over here, but the differences in terms of miles of difference that they're apart is not that great. Now in terms of impacts, or for some areas like Tallahassee, it makes a huge difference. So I do want to talk about impacts as specifically as I can today. I can't answer every question about who's going to get the worst of the winds. I want to talk about some things that we can say with confidence. So first, I want to talk about storm surge, because the storm surge from Idalia is going to be the #1 threat from this storm, and it's going to extend over a very broad area of the Florida Gulf Coast, along the peninsula and then north into Appalachia Bay. National Hurricane Center has a peak storm surge forecast somewhere in eastern Appalachia Bay and the northern Nature Coast of 8 to 12 feet. That could even go higher. There's some possibility that there's a localized surge even higher than that if the storm intensifies more than they think. This is kind of the mean level of what might happen somewhere within that range. And if you note further south, there's quite significant surge as well. Most likely surge in Tampa Bay, 4 to 7 feet. It could go higher as well if the storm tracks closer to the Tampa Bay region. Southwest Florida, it's not going to be, you are not going to see landfall in Southwest Florida from Idalia, but you will see significant storm surge on the order of 3 to 5 feet north of Charlotte Harbor, 2 to 4 feet to the south. That's a significant storm surge down there. And then again, this is something, these surge values, they're not really sensitive to the exact track. If Idalia tracks like this, or if it tracks like this, you're still going to get that onshore flow into Tampa Bay, into Southwest Florida, into West Central Florida, and you're going to have those surge values. So again, that's a high confidence forecast. Now further north into Appalachia Bay, the surge is going to be a lot less to the left of the track. So if the center track's over you, or if it is, or if you are to the east of the track, then you're going to get significant surge from that onshore flow. On the other side of the storm, you'll be getting offshore flow, so you're not likely to see significant and damaging surge once you get west of that core. So that's something we need to keep an eye on here in Appalachia Bay. Again, unfortunately, I'm not able to answer how much surge Appalachia Bay is going to get. A track further south and east, you'll see a lot less surge in Appalachia Bay. A track that comes up into Appalachia Bay, you'll be looking at those likely 8 to 12 foot values, unfortunately. So, we'll start to narrow down that range tomorrow and have a better idea, hopefully, if who's going to get what. So again, I do want to remind you that a hurricane is not a point. The cone here, this is a product called Hurricane Threats and Impacts from the National Weather Service, and this cone, that's the potential region that's most likely to see the center of circulation track within this region. So center of circulation could track more in the direction of Crystal River, could track more in the direction of Alligator Point. We don't know. But you are going to have impacts extending well outside that cone. So don't look at the forecast cone and say nothing is going to happen outside of that cone, because you're going to have significant impacts, especially on the east side of the storm, well outside of the cone, such as in the Tampa Bay area. Now, Tampa Bay in particular, I do want to devote a moment to talking about this, because while Tampa Bay is going to see some pretty significant surge no matter what, there's some sensitivity here towards exactly how close the storm tracks to land. So this is the forecast track overlaid with the tropical storm and hurricane wind radii. So these kind of red arcs, that's the region where we're going to see sustained tropical storm force winds within that quadrant. So as you have a forecast track right now where Idalia is moving about 90 miles west of Tampa. That's the current Hurricane Center forecast track. But that 90 miles, you're still in that region of sustained tropical storm force winds. Now, say if Idalia was to track more like 50 miles to the west of Tampa, you could be in this region, this darker maroon of 50 knot sustained winds, which is going to drive an even bigger surge and more dangerous surge. I know there's evacuation orders in Pinellas and I think portions of Hillsborough County. So if you're under one of those, please heed the warning. Do not look at the cone and say, I'm outside the cone, I'm fine, nothing is going to happen to me, because the cone is not an impacts cone. It's where the center of circulation is most likely to move. And you can see these winds of tropical storm force, and the destructive and life-threatening surge is going to be well east of what's showing up on the cone, because that's just not what the cone is communicating. Going forward to talking about wind is tricky, because the way hurricanes work is that there's a region close to the center of circulation, possibly about this big with Idalia, and that's the region where you're going to see those hurricane force and well beyond potentially major hurricane force sustained winds. And what we don't know right now, what this cone represents, is we don't know if that donut of damaging winds is going to be over here, or that donut of damaging winds is going to be over here and moving this way. So that's something that we simply don't know yet. The Hurricane Center most likely forecast track here kind of north of Cedar Key now, this region outlined in purple by the National Weather Service, that's the area that has the greatest potential for winds exceeding 110 miles per hour, where you'll have the potential for structural damage. This area outlined in red has the greatest potential for hurricane force wind gusts. Now, not everyone in the purple is going to see 110 mile per hour wind gusts. Not everyone in the red is going to see hurricane force wind gusts. It's going to be very sensitive to where exactly that core moves ashore. Now, this is very frustrating because you can see if you're in Tallahassee, like me, you're right on the edge of the region that's maybe going to pick up that hurricane force and above wind gusts. Say if the center tracks here into Taylor County, Steinhatchee, you're probably going to see that core of destructive winds stay to your southeast. However, if it's to track further north towards St. Mark's, that core of destructive winds could move over Tallahassee. Is it likely? Probably not. Is it possible? It's definitely possible. And we need to watch this forecast very, very closely. Unfortunately, I just can't tell you right now if we're going to see more like 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts with a track further into the northern Nature Coast or far eastern Appalachia Bay, or whether we'll be seeing hurricane force wind gusts and above. So the region that's most likely to see those hurricane force wind gusts is basically bounded by Tallahassee, down here along the northern Tampa Bay region, and then up towards coastal Georgia. That's the region where we're most likely to see those winds. Now, this is just an illustration. This is one model. This is the 18Z European model, but I think it's a good illustration just to show you what kind of a wind field looks like. The damaging winds are going to be in that area that's kind of outlined in brown. This is just a model. It could go left, it could go right from here, but it's basically showing how big that area of damaging and destructive winds, truly destructive winds, is going to be. It's starting to approach the coast sometime early Wednesday morning, and then moving onshore sometime in the late morning, early afternoon, and then moving inland across southeastern Georgia through the remainder of the day on Wednesday. Again, I'll have a finer point hopefully to put on the wind forecast tomorrow, but for now, unfortunately, we're going to have to live with the uncertainty. I see a question about Wakulla County for wind gusts. Well, unfortunately, you're really in the same boat. If you miss that core, the core goes to your south and east. You're probably talking about high-end tropical storm force, low-end hurricane force wind gusts along the coast, tropical storm force stuff inland. If that core comes towards you, all bets are off, and it could be 100 plus mile per hour wind gusts. So again, not everybody in that region, in this region of purple, is going to see those top end 100 plus mile per hour winds, but somebody likely is. So going forward to talk about rain, I'll just talk about this very quickly. Idalia is going to be moving fairly fast, 15 plus miles per hour as it comes in. So we're not talking about Ian-like rains of 10 or 15 inches. We're talking about probably 4 to 8 inches of rainfall here across the eastern panhandle, north central Florida, and west central Florida, with otherwise totals across the state generally between 1 and 4 inches. Probably a sharp cutoff here to the west as potentially some drier air works off the continent and into around the south side of the storm as it makes landfall, cutting off precip across the western panhandle. So not much rainfall expected in the western panhandle. We'll see exactly where that cutoff sets up. Again, we don't quite know. I've gotten some questions about how long do I have to prepare? How long is the weather going to hold out tomorrow for me to make preparations? Well, you have, I think, at least the first half of the day. We're going to see maybe some scattered, bands coming through. I think that it's not going to be until the overnight hours tomorrow that we're seeing heavier and steadier rainfall. So this would be kind of early Wednesday and then moving into late morning on Wednesday, and landfall sometime in that, I'd call it maybe 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. time frame here in the northeastern Gulf. So you have most of the day tomorrow to finish up your preps. You may have to dodge some bands and showers towards the end of that if you hold off that long, but the really truly dangerous conditions, staying off the road, staying indoors, it's going to be Wednesday is the day. So just Also, just to note, those heavier rainfalls as you go further north into Georgia, the Carolinas, this portion of the Big Bend as well. Those are the places where there's some risk of flash flooding from those rains, just given the soil conditions and propensity for flooding. It's that area in red that we need to watch for some flash flooding. Finally, tornadoes. I don't think they're going to be a huge threat here. This area outlined in yellow across west central Florida should be on the alert for tornadic activity in bands. Tomorrow afternoon and evening have a way of receiving tornado warnings. Tornadoes spin up very quickly in these outer bands north and east of the center. Moving into the day on Wednesday, that area of tornadic risks shifts into northeast Florida and the coastal Carolinas. So with that, I'm going to, I think I'll wrap it up, and I'd be happy to take any questions if I see any. Let me check. Let me check here. Right. So yes, there was a question about the 18Z Euro and my thoughts on it. Yes, I actually did show the 18Z Euro, so let me flip back to it. These figures are based on the 18Z Euro. What we've seen in the 18Z model run, some of the models that were farther west have come east. GFS, HWRF, HMON have come east a little bit in that 18Z model cycle versus 12Z. The Euro has come a little bit to the west, and there's a little bit of convergence between the modeling, the various types of guidance as we're heading into the overnight hours. I mean, I think this is kind of something that you expect to see as it gets closer. You're kind of narrowing down the focus of the regions that could get hit. I think this is a perfectly plausible potential track. The Euro has been very consistent on bringing this into the Big Bend, Taylor County, Steinhatchee, for many days. So it is definitely something to watch. Yes, so that's something that I'm watching carefully. I'm also comparing them with what the storm is currently doing now to make sure that it's following kind of what the initial hours of the forecast say it should be doing. In Jackson County, I don't think you have to worry a whole lot about this one. You took it on the chin with Michael. This is going to go to your south and east. I don't even think you'll see a lot of rain out in Mariana. Maybe a few bands coming through, some breezy conditions. Maybe a low-end tropical storm force wind gusts. Nothing damn. Right. Is that Tallahassee? The question is, what kind of impacts can Tallahassee expect as the core passes by? Well, again, that just depends on that exact track of the core. If the center of Idalia is passing over Jefferson County, we're going to be in the northwest quadrant. As in Hermine, the conditions in the northwest quadrant obviously were quite damaging in Tallahassee. But there is a sharp cutoff in that western half of the storm. So if you have a landfall more like Cedar Key, that core is going to miss Tallahassee, and we won't see those damaging winds quite the same way. Power outages, yes. Down trees, it's Tallahassee, yes. Wind gusts of 50, 60 miles per hour, sure, absolutely. And that wreaks enough havoc here as is. That core, that's when you start to get into the 80, 90, 100 or beyond winds. And that's a whole nother level of damage, that we didn't see in Michael, that we didn't see in Hermine, where the winds topped out, right around 70, 75 miles per hour wind gusts here. So, okay. And then a question about what's the likelihood that the storm is upgraded to a Category 4? It's very possible. It's hard to predict once a rapid intensification event starts. Sometimes the sky is just the limit, and round it goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. I feel like the odds are maybe down a little bit relative to earlier today, just because we haven't seen immediate strengthening over the course of the day on Monday, which is a good thing. We're starting from 60 knots rather than 80 knots. So, if I had to put a number on it, I'd say so. Okay, so that's it. I think I'm going to leave it there. Just remember, the further west you go in the Panhandle, the less likely it is that you're going to see truly destructive winds. Yeah, and that's the same thing with the surge as well. The further west you go, in Appalachia Bay, the less likely you are to see destructive surge. But we just don't know where that line is going to be, how much of Appalachia Bay is going to get, get the surge, get the core, get those onshore winds. All right, well, you have another day to prepare. Get ready. Do what you need to do. If you're in a low-lying area that floods anywhere in Appalachia Bay, Nature Coast, you got to get out of there. This is, the potential for even surge beyond what we saw in Dennis, which is the recent high water mark for a lot of central and eastern Appalachia Bay. So that's something to chew on. If your property flooded in Dennis and you're on Appalachia Bay, it's likely to, or at least there's a probability you don't want to ignore that it's going to flood this time. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Prepare, stay safe, Florida. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut from WeatherTiger. You can always view our forecasts on WeatherTiger.com 24 hours a day and via the USA Today network. I'll be back tomorrow with an additional, with a look at region by region impacts across the state, and I'll have more live forecast videos for the duration. All right, stay safe, Florida. Keep watching the skies.